Hello, everybody. My name is Rabbi Jamie Aklepi from Temple Beth Am in Pinecrest, Florida, and I am so excited to be moderating this discussion with creator-director Yair Qedar and discussing his movie about Amos Oz, The Fourth Window. It is a pleasure to be here this morning and to share with all of you who have seen this movie, the ideas, what's behind the scenes, and some more information. This is a very special year for the Miami Jewish Film Festival, 25 years. And I've attended a few films every one of those years. Sponsored by the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, also known as SAGE, we are pleased to be a part of this community project, one of the best film festivals in the world. We thank all of our sponsors this morning for bringing us these incredible films, these Jewish films that really bring so much to our life here in Miami. So thank you, everybody, and welcome, Yair. Boker Tov. It's so nice to see you. So this is what I've learned so far. Ha'ivrim, the organization, the Hebrews, reminded me of the name of, I'm probably getting this wrong, and really at the time of the statehood of those Israeli poets and writers, the Knaanim, right, who who wanted to create this new kind of literature of this new Israeli. So you are here with a few films, couple of films, and about writers. And because I've done some research, I know that these two are not your only ones. You have a film about the poets, of course, some of the women poets, which I am especially fond of. And what's the idea behind this project? Did you sit down and create a list of who are the important Israeli writers? And we really need to get more information about them because they were so important in creating some of the most national myths of the country and of the people. If I look back at my own Zionist life, I would say that the first thing that moved me as a young child, of course, was music. And then my first trip to Israel, I remember I was just graduated high school, and one of our madrichim, an Israeli, said, "So Jamie, you thought it was all about dancing hora in the cornfields?" And I looked and I was like, yeah, that's what I thought being in Israel was going to be like. But then I started with the literature. And I would say, I think my first Amos Oz book was In the Land of Israel. And my mind was opened to something more than the white Ashkenazi with protexia, and a whole new world of what Israel was. And I realized a lot really through this movie, The Fourth Window, that was my understanding of Israel. Even though I've lived in Israel a few times with a whole bunch of different people, I still feel like that is what I cannot get out of the ethos of who I am as a Zionist. So Yair, tell us about this big project, and then I'll narrow and zoom in into The Fourth Window.
Sure, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the lovely introduction. The Hebrews project began 11 years ago, I think 11 years ago, and I had a list. I wanted to create the list of the Israeli canon that began as the list of the Israeli canon. All the greatest figures that created Hebrew literature in the last 120 years. That was the beginning, and I had a list. But what happened in the last 10 years, every year, or maybe 3 times a year, or 12 times a year, the list changes. So it's an evolving project, the Hebrews. And you have a wonderful idea about the connection to the Canaanites and those writers from the early 40s, but mainly 50s and 60s, but they were a bit anti-religious. And this is not something that is in the Hebrews. So I took the notion, the Hebrews, which is very wide and open. It is not even not committing notion or term. It could be also influenced what the Russians call Jews. They call it Hebrews. They call Jews Hebrews when they use the better word, the Russians.
Evreysky.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So it's like an open door, which began as an open window, perhaps I should say, in the spirit of the Amos Oz film, to Israeli literature. But then, other figures knocked on the door. Figures like the poet Abraham Sutzkever. Abraham Sutzkever is the greatest Yiddish poet. He didn't write in Hebrew. He lived in Israel 6 years of his life. Jacqueline Kahanov. Jacqueline Kahanov is an essayist. She didn't write a word in Hebrew, and she wrote about tensions between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim and was some of the first feminist writings in Israel from the 30s. So the project began to be, I think it's more now, how do you say, the Jewish book shelf. So it's like the Jewish cinematic shelf, perhaps. And from Bialik and Amos Oz and Aleph Bet Yoshua, which all showing in the festival, and Zendal and La Goldberg, we made films about Avraham Sutzkever, Jacqueline Kahanov, also about Shalom Shabazi, Yemenite rabbi, died 400 years ago. And now we're working on 3 films on Baruch Spinoza, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx. So we're expanding. The window became with the 5th and the 6th. The windows are very big now. I think it's a window to Jewish creativity of people that use text. And I think of the Hebrews as an open project in which I invite people, usually to direct, sometimes I direct, but also to take part in this creative process in kind of a lab. And in this lab, I invite animators and editors and directors to put their mark. This is your playground. Be creative. This is a homage, but it's also a translation of the text and work, an essence of these artists from the past to contemporary, to now. So each film has to find its own path. It is not a series, it's an anthology. Each film has to solve his riddle. So now we are trying to solve the riddle of Marx, Spinoza, and Freud with 3 directors that are working on the project now. So each film is similar, but very also different. It's, how do you say, couture. It should be couture, created individually. And the search is interesting. What should be the language, the cinematic language? How do we, composition, shot, who the people we interview? Do you use animation? What kind of music? What kind of atmosphere? What is the narrative? So all questions that we ask themselves in the process of work. And all those things became a little bit harder and sharper in the case of Amos Oz because of something had to do with the timeline of the making of the film.
So tell us a little bit about the timeline of the film. The film focuses around the interview with Norit, and we hear Amos Oz's voice saying, tell the story about me. And then you seem to open up and tell that story. So what's the timeline?
Okay, now we 3 years ago, by the way, Amos Oz left us. So
right.
Now we remember
Yes.
3 years to his departure, to his death. And when he died, that same day, I got a call from the Israeli television. Are you making a film about Amos Oz? And I said, yes. That began my journey. So I began the journey 3 years ago today.
Oh, after he died. Okay.
On the day he died. On the day
he died.
Yes, yes. And
So,
I was looking for what would be more new, actually. He is the best storyteller. He's not making this film. So how do I find an angle, a crack, a way from which I can tell interesting story, a new story that was not told or seen? And I found Norit Gertz, who was writing a book. His biography was based on their conversation. And slowly, she agreed and she began to give me those recordings. So this I base on one of the storylines of the film is those recordings from the last 2 or 2.5 years of his life, talking over the phone with Norit. Norit, good friend, researching his work, friend of the family, recorded those conversations, and we edited those conversations into a storyline, which is very unique in the way that it is the last story. This is the last story that Amos told us. He's very sick. He's having some emotional stress inside of the family, of his health, and he's like a biblical figure. Was it worth it all? He's asking himself and us, and he's telling this story to Nurit, who's a good friend, and those conversations seem very honest and sincere, but also they're meant to be part of the book. And it is storyteller that tells those stories.
It's like when I listen to his words with Nurit, I'm very conscious that he is very conscious that he is telling his story, and even so, even in the casual conversation, it is not necessarily casual, because he tells her, "Tell my story, but the whole picture, right? That I'm not perfect, I'm not this great guy," and I think the part of the story which well, the many parts stuck with me, but the part that he was so broken, and that no matter what he did, he had this hole in his heart. He had this hole of his mother abandoning him, and no matter how many books he wrote, no matter how many relationships, no matter how many awards, he has not healed from that, and he wasn't going to heal. And as a rabbi who works a lot with people with grief, I kept thinking, well, if his mother died differently, maybe not by suicide, maybe by an illness, would he have been so broken as a human being his whole life? And what would that have changed? But that was that brokenness, and he talks about it. That he writes about broken families and unhappy families, and how there's truth in all of that. I have a question about the title, and I think now, just hearing you speak, my ideas were way off. But the fourth window kept thinking, and first of all, the scene. We're looking at a scene, very Tel Aviv street, outside of a window. I'm thinking, well, maybe it's the fourth window from the left, or fourth window from the bottom, or maybe his mother was the first window, and his kibbutz window was the second window, and Nurit's story is the third window, and his legacy is the fourth window. So what's going on with the fourth window? Where am I supposed to be directed? How am I supposed to sit down and direct my thoughts to opening up and sitting and watching this film?
I would like to say something about the broken Amos before I say something at the window. Okay. If I can. It's amazing to see that someone in his status, in his maturity, in his wiseness, is so broken, and it's very, very rare to find an artist in this stage of in his life talking like that. It's very, very rare. And some friend of mine from the profession of taking care of people with some problems told me that this is a trauma that was not dealt at the time.
Right.
An unattended trauma, and this is something that, and one of the results of this is narcissism, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's very clear.
Yeah, all right, yeah, yes, it happens there. And of course, he had another trauma happening during the making of the recordings and also in the film, so that enhanced the feeling of the film, of his breaking. As for the window, it was a little bit obscure and abstract, and I embrace all your interpretations, but I offer you mine. All right, we couldn't shoot from his window because it's very high and it looks on roofs. It doesn't look very aesthetic. And Nurit Gert's house is on the first floor, and you see just plants. So we hired a flat in the street in Tel Aviv. And since it was COVID, I hired a theater. So it was actors that passing through the streets. So it's
well, I read the credits, kept looking to see where that was shot, and you did have 2 apartments listed there. So I was wondering if you just moved everybody there, and those were actors who are walking by. Was it a change?
Viewer, yes. A very sharp viewer, yes.
Thank you. Well, I had a job to do to meet you. Yeah, so right. I figured I watched the whole film twice. Trying to be watching it very carefully, first emotionally, second emotionally, both times trying to watch it carefully. So Amos Oz presents himself unabashedly as this I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'll just say a person with narcissistic traits without the diagnosis, and really has everybody else surrounding him praising him, and he loves that, and he needs that, and to see, he seems to say that without that he's unable to continue this writing, that it is this mix of unhappiness and this mix of narcissism which drives him to the next book. I mean, the funny sketch that you had, what is it, at the end with buying the Amos Oz book, and so, Amos, are you done? That's so funny. I love those sketches. So where was the focus? Were you the production, I mean, the number of books, the quality of the books? I mean, he had a lot of critics, especially about his language, about his treatment of the Mizrahi, Sephardim, about his elitist, the way that he's elite. And we never, even through the movie, I'm never sure if he remains an elitist or not. I never get, I keep looking for that, but he seems to keep himself away. So is he really the voice of Israel, the writer of Israel, or is he the writer of Israel from the 60s to the early 80s and maybe some other things later on? Where, I mean, for me, he had created Israel and Israelis in my head. Is that right? Was he right or was he wrong? Did he get it right? Did he get it wrong?
He got it right for his time. He was the voice of Israel. He was the window of the shop called Israel during perhaps 3 decades. And then he began to fade away. That's in internal Israeli affairs, but outside of Israel, he had another role. Yes, from the 60s until he died, he had a voice criticizing the government, peace movement, working with Peres, being a leftist. So it's very interesting to see how these two careers helped each other. Yeah, how he was accepted better and he got more. Aleph Bet Yehoshua Bully told me the previous generation of writers were not less talented than us, but we had a 6 Days War and we had the whole world looking at us and embracing our critical position towards Israeli policy, and we became superheroes, the most popular people in all the salons of the liberal left, which controls culture in the West. So he was honest enough to say it. Amos Oz all the time you all the time feel that he's wearing some kind of mask. And Nurit Gerz told me that there's nothing behind that mask. It's only another mask and another. This is the truth it can get. And I, as a filmmaker, wanted to make a film about him and go deep and more personal. So this is as close as was possible to get, I think, from the research that I made and from the materials that I got. And you're right that he held like circles of admirers, but he couldn't help it. And you look how he's very nice.
Oh yeah, he was good looking.
He was good looking. How his
I
wife.
love the interview. I love the interview with his wife. He came to kibbutz and he wasn't ugly. He wasn't. I mean,
he wasn't ugly. No.
He wasn't ugly, and look at him, and that certainly, I guess, that helps.
And I owe you an answer about the first window. Yet I come slowly with this. You were slightly right. The first window is the window where he sits in the kibbutz and all the people are passing by, and he right. The second window is the Hannah Gonen from My Michael. She looks at the window and her husband comes and she draws a heart, an initial.
Right.
The third window is the window of his mother. The last night, she sits by the window and she takes the pills, perhaps she committed suicide, perhaps she took like overdose, we don't know. But she looks and the rain, washes the window. And the fourth window is the window of this artistic, theatrical, half documentary window of the film, which we created. And then we were amazed to get his recording when he tells Noé that I, like my mother, sit by the window and yearn. So it was, the other side called us and said, okay, it's interesting that you chose the window. It's based on something, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think I was very moved, of course, by the mother by the window and then by Hannah and watching him. But when I watched him at the kibbutz window, which was actual footage, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I got this feeling of, well, let's say it, not so admiration or like. I that's just like sort of yucky feeling of like watching him, watching everybody. And really as he was separate, but and so the idea is a person like Amos Oz, in this case, Amos Oz himself, who really gets into the heart of who Israel was at that time and who the people were. Can you do that from being apart? Although he wasn't that's a big cultural sense, but how it was amazing that he could get into the people's heads by being such an observer. Because how much did he mix? I mean, the peace movement, yes, but in the day-to-day lives of the people, he seemed always separate from them, and yet he seemed to know them so well. He seemed to really get who they were. Their hates, when the footage on the kibbutz with his voice saying, or the narrator talking about how they really hate everything and they need to hate to be successful. Yeah. I was like, it was frighteningly real looking at those faces. Talk a little bit about matching up the footage with the narration, and how do you choose which books? Did you start with the books and the words, or did you start with the images?
Okay, I thought of like a camel with two humps. Two humps. So the first hump is my Michael, and the second is the Tale of Love and Darkness. So that's what I thought of his literary career as a reader for me. Yeah, so I constructed the film about two humps, two Everests. Yes, and I had a list of things which I should have put in the film. I have a list, yes, because this is like an official, sort of official biography. I decided not to use animation as I use in other films. And then I had these 2.5 storylines. The first is the real-time conversation recorded with Gad. And the second is the linear biography. And the third is the political one, which is more mild, it's smaller than the literary one. So it's personal and literary, that's the main second storyline. And there I use his archives, and then I'm trying to find unique and original archives. And I had two very interesting findings. One of them is the night of the November, the UN resolution. And usually you use the known archives are people dancing in the street. And we got to a very rare black and white still collection in the Israel Museum, or someone who made shot the people waiting for the decision. And then you see all the fear, the anxiety, they all look like, poor people that came from the Holocaust. You see the anxiety, you never see it in other kind of footage. So I'm very proud of this footage that Lily Udinsky, the visual researcher, got. Or the other footage from the kibbutz, when he takes the cigarette. So we found Chris Marker, one of the prominent documentary filmmakers in the world, came in 1959 to Israel and made a film. It's called The Third Side of the Coin, I think it's called in English. And then he shot a members committee in the kibbutz. It's very rare, in full color. So we took it and we can show, it's another kibbutz. And by the way, the lady who stands and counts the votes of the members is Rachel Rabin, is the sister of Yitzhak Rabin. So it was like like a chase, like a hunt of the best archival footage we could get of him, and of other things that we illustrate, or other things will be original. So it's just many minutes of archival footage in its combination, as you see with the UN resolution. So we have the photos, and then we have some Jerusalem at night, and then we have Natalie Portman's film. And I had a wonderful editor, Nili Feller, who edits really the best Israeli films, the Nadav Lapid, and Ari Fulman, and Rantal films. She edited the film. She was a real partner in the making of this. It's actually a collage. It's like lace. We weave, and it's not delicate enough. It's not sensitive. That's right. And then we have to be attentive and to try to make to weave better.
So for the other documentaries on artists that you're doing and done, I haven't seen the Aleph Yehoshua one yet. So do you also start with I will see it, the literature and then the biography? is that the way, is that the creation, is that the way that those are created? And does anyone hold prominence in your own head as the creator?
In terms of the creation,
in making the film, you said the two humps were My Michael and A Tale of Love and Darkness, and the biographical.
Yes.
Does something hold prominence in your head that motivates you or moves you to go in a direction of what you want the film to look like and what you want it to say?
Or I'm in a search, you know, I disqualify 100, 200 scripts in my head before I find the right script. And it should be, the main thing is, what is the concept? The concept is the question, yes? And after I choose the main concept, what is the main concept of the film? You know, what is his style? What is the story? And then all the rest evolves from that. And I have lists of to-dos, but the to-do can be part of any concept. When I have 7 books of Amos Oz should be in the film, then they would be in any concept that I choose. But the search, in the initial search of the concept. In the case of Aleph Bet Yeshua, it was alive. The first time I made a film about a life living writer. And then I have another set of, totally another set of decisions to make and changes that I had to do in the film because he was alive, which is wonderful. And in the case of Amos Oz, it was a search of the concept, and you have to count your intuition. And if you fail, it's not too late. So it did happen that, you know, after 7, 8 months, we throw away the material and we start. You know,
Wow.
in the film of Zelda, you know, the animation was not doing its work. So I put it in a file and we created a new kind of animation. It should be very important, the freedom to listen to what's happening in the world, because, you know, I come with my dreams and visions, and there is the writer and the sensitivity in his aura and the knowledge about it, the content, the people around him, the researchers, the family. But then I start to do the film, and it's happening in the computer, in the Avid program, and that's beginning to be the film. That's the thing, and I have to listen to what the thing wants.
So yeah.
Advices, yeah.
So my final question is, what was the question you were attempting to answer in this film about Amos Oz?
I wanted to have a moving moment with Amos Oz. He was very, very repetitious. He chose some answers, you know, he chose the facade to the world in the early stage. He didn't change it much. He elaborated it, but he had a very strong and thick facade. And I wanted a moment with Amos Oz when it's not a facade, he's not working for the peace movement, he's not selling, he's not telling one of his stories that he repeats his story, but to find a sensitive moment where I feel, you know, emotional for him, that I sense sincerity, and I think and hope that we achieved it in the film. So that was the goal from the beginning, and that was our ambition, and you know, finding the outputs. This was a Rabin ceremony memorial, when he waits for the camera, for the lights. And he had a very long look at the camera, and to put the text, the broken text of the big hole, galactical hole, with this, we said, okay, we've got this moment, and everything will lead to this, for this moment. And I'm still moved when I see this last finale. And it was important to me not to end the film there. So to give a little bit hope later, to find this new light. There will be light that will make a difference, make a change that will come later, to have like to signature of hope in the end, a little bit.
I think you got us to be hopeful at the end. And I think we were able to see in those moments and others, an Amos Oz with the mask slightly removed, hear his voice, hear him being tortured, but also hear his love of Hebrew, his love of literature, his love of the Jewish people and Israeli people, who all of the people in Israel, and really his hope that things could be different, and that I think he was hopeful that in addition to the literature, in addition to his stories, that he brought something else to the world. Because I had a feeling from your film that he would have felt his life less useful if he also wasn't involved in the peace process. And I think there, although it may not seem like that today, but there is some hope. So thank you so much for taking this time to speak with us, Yair, and thank you so much for the films. I'd love to see all of them. I tried to get some online, but I couldn't, so you'll have to direct me. I had to see Zelda and Lillian, and there's one about Leah Goldberg also.
Sure.
Looking forward, and of course the Aleph Bet Yehoshua film, which we'll be discussing in a few minutes. So take good care, and toda rabah and b'hatzlacha.
Toda rabah, stay healthy. It was great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.